yet, but I'm hitting it now. So I guess the lag will just catch up. But we are live now, Hake. So thank you so much for joining me on this, my very first after show. And I guess we got some people in the live chat that are watching. I'm going to pop this out.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kaz. It's great talking with you. I've appreciated being on the debates that you've hosted. It's been cool.
No, thank you so much for joining me, man. I really appreciate it. It's a it's a crazy ride here. So, systemic racism, the debate. How do you feel it went?
I enjoyed it. It did blow by fast. It's hard to know how it really went, but I did feel like I got the points in that I wanted to say. It did feel like there may have been something missing. He expressed that he wished that we'd been able to get deeper into stuff. Like I would love to deal with those issues that he was bringing up and just really deal with them. It's hard to without knowing the specifics, because he's looked at the studies and I haven't, and I have to kind of take him at his word. And I think that, for example, the anecdote stories are really sometimes informative as to what really went down when he talked about, for example, the disproportionate sentences and stuff like that. But I had fun. It did feel, for some reason, it felt short and maybe a little incomplete, but I don't know what else I would have said.
Yeah, I think that in any of these discussions, it's always going to be incomplete because nobody's going to feel like they won because the other person hasn't changed their mind yet, right?
Yeah, but it seemed like he definitely wanted to say more or get more into a topic. And my satisfaction with a debate is when I've said what I feel is true. I've just said my piece, whether or not he accepts or not it, So I was overall, I think I was happy, but it's just hard to tell how you did, and you know what I mean?
No,
I don't know if you've ever been in that situation.
Oh yeah, I've done my fair share. Well, not fair share. I haven't done a lot yet. I've done a few debates on the Monday debates, but they've gone in several different directions.
I was told that Hunter was going to be like snarky and dishonest and shallow, but I found him quite pleasant, actually.
Yeah,
it was fun to talk to.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because people will always tell you stuff about people that is based on their own personal opinions. But I'm glad that you were able to form your own opinion without having that bias you.
Well, when you read somebody's Twitter feed, they can come off differently because you're reading it, and you read it much more harshly sometimes than they're saying it. But yeah, when you talk with people, sometimes I felt like his arguments were on, I think his diagnoses of the issues are sort of shallow. I think this racism thing is like a distraction, and it's causing more problems than it's solving. This diagnosis of racism.
Let me write that down real quick. You said that it's a distraction. I'm going to put that in my notes because that's something I want to come back to. Cool. Tony, are you here yet? Or can you hear us? Can you say anything? Just
his mic looks like it's turned off or it's muted
right now. Racism is a distraction. I took some notes while you were talking.
Nice,
for
man.
Some things that I wanted to try to hit on.
Cool.
And I'm just adding that.
This is cool. I think this is kind of can let us get into deeper things more calmly.
Tony, are you here, man? If you're not here, I'm gonna. I don't know, man.
Do you know how to unmute because there's different ways to unmute yourself. There's mechanically unmute yourself, I guess, and then within the he's connecting through Discord or through
I don't know.
StreamYard.
I don't know. This is our first time doing this. Me and him have had a conversation before. It went well, but I've never done a live discussion before. So
I wonder if you can go in and click the unmute button.
I tried. It didn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, but okay. Well, I'm gonna remove him from the stream until I see him come on the microphone. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But so let me just tell you where I'm at. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we'll go from there. So honestly, I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
I I do believe that systemic racism is real. And I think that the disconnect is something to do with your entire conception of what racism is. And I really want to try to explore that
Cool.
with you. Do
Yeah.
you think that that's on track? Do you think that I'm
I
reading that
think
right?
that I think it is. I think it is on track because, like I say, that even like in no way has it ever existed. Has racism ever existed? Like I
Okay.
think that it's a like I said, a misdiagnosis to
What
get
is your
people to judge. Go ahead.
what is your understanding of what racism is?
Um, on knee-jerk reaction of what I think that it is hating somebody based on their race or hating people based on their race.
Hatred based on
Yeah,
race.
yeah. But I
So it
also
has to
know
be
that it's
hatred.
right. But there's also like the notion of superiority. But when people are hateful, they feel superior to the person that they're hating.
I want to
When
write
you're
this down.
for example, when you're angry, just to kind of elaborate on what I'm saying, when you're angry at someone, you're usually thinking that you are righteously angry against this person and you are right and they're wrong. You feel superior to them. And that's what the so-called racist feels, the person who says, I hate black people or I hate white people, or the person who hates them and doesn't acknowledge that they hate them. And it's also what's happening with the person crying racism. The people crying racism are guilty of the same judgment that they're accusing the accused of having.
Um, I'm sorry. Could you say that last sentence one more time?
The person crying racism is guilty of the same judgment that he's accusing the accused of having. For example, like Derek Chauvin with his knee on the neck of George Floyd. They read racism into that situation, but they're profiling, if you will, him. But I say that that's not racism. That's a judgment. That's a judgment and blindness. And
Okay. So
continuing to call it racism is, like I said, a distraction.
I see your point there, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's not necessarily dig into George Floyd and Derek
Right.
Chauvin because that's a loaded thing where we have real facts to go on, right? But
Yeah.
like, I can see how if somebody who happens to be white does something to somebody who happens to be black, somebody else outside of that could look at that situation and just infer that that person is being racist, and
Yeah.
that in and of itself is a racist thing, right?
I call it not racism, but people would call it racism. But at root,
Right,
I
right,
want to
right.
get to the root. I feel like the root is a judgment that we're all guilty of.
Yeah, yeah. You wrote that. That's something I wrote down. You said racism is a judgment, but that's a funny statement because you also said racism doesn't exist.
Right. So,
Yeah.
like stuff that's called racist, very frequently people are called racist for saying something true.
Okay.
Saying, and then so I say it's not race. It's either right or wrong. It's true or false. It's good or evil. It's just or unjust, and it's based in reality or it's not.
So you have a very interesting linguistic philosophy. You use words or you accept words differently than I do, and we're going to
Right.
have to do some work to try to bridge that gap, I think.
I'll be fine with using the term racism for because people will say it's racism.
No. I don't want you to just use the word just for the conversation, because that's, I think, the heart of the issue. So I think that there's no point in getting you to just use the word for conversation if we're going to debate whether racism even exists.
Yeah.
So I think that what we really need to talk about is that word.
Okay.
Don't you agree? I mean, I could be wrong.
I do, but I think that there's a lot of things that philosophically maybe don't really exist. Like I'm heavily influenced, for example, by Jesse Lee Peterson. I was his producer. I've been to his church a lot. And he said things like, there's no such thing as like, I like this person. You turn around the next day, you hate them. And so there's no such thing as like, because like is feeling and feelings change. And you shouldn't base it on that. So similarly, I think that you shouldn't pretend that the judgment is based on the skin color or the race, but the judgment is based on the heart of the person judging and their issues. Because people are always going to blindly judge based on all kinds of, well, it's not based on all kinds of funny things, but they'll jump to the wrong conclusions, but it's an issue with them. And it's not at root racism. It's just it's an illusion, especially brought out through like a diverse country like we have.
Okay. Give me a second. I'll let Tony. Tony, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to let you have a second to just introduce yourself and say a couple words about. I don't know if you got the chance to actually listen to the debate or whatnot. Whatever you want to share, real quick. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
So Tony, out here in LA right now, or down in San Diego for the day. Extensive background in military intelligence, some geopolitical stuff around the world. I now consult for cybersecurity and other security issues. So, from what I did here, and kind of to Hake's point, like I think you're on. I agree in part, right? I think there's a lot of overlap in things of various variants of degrees that you can look at this problem, right? I think me and Kaz had talked about this at one point. How I saw it was there's 1,000 different ways of looking at this, right? Some stuff is a little bit more nuanced and it overlays, right? So you can have socioeconomic things that are based in race that apply now and can kind of look that way and present a certain way. And sometimes it could just be blatant racism. It really takes a lot more involved look at some of these things than they are being painted a lot of the times. I was actually just talking to somebody about the LAPD and a case that was going on with them, and it was painted as blatant racism, and it was truer from the sense it was more so that hey, this guy was just a jerk. To your point, if you don't like somebody, you don't like somebody. If you like them, you like them. There's no big sway overnight where somebody's just like, you know what, I'm a racist today. So there's a pattern that you would generally see that would build to that. And that went back into with the new DA, some of the policies he's instituting to try to reform this. It says, well, it's not as easy as you would like to call it out because, as I see it, most of the law enforcement policies are neutral. I'll say, and I won't say they're systemic based written into the policies themselves, but that allows somebody to kind of bend it to their will, and there's no checks and balances for that. Is where I would see it. I'll leave it there for right now.
Okay. Hake, do you have any response to that or any kind of?
That's interesting. George Gascon. I think that there is a problem where, and I don't know if this speaks directly to what you're saying, Tony, but there's a problem where, like I said in the debate, like liberals come up with false solutions to stuff that they either misdiagnose or maybe they're accurate in some of the problems that they bring up, because they have brought up issues that are real issues, but they come up with solutions that cause even more problems. And I think it's partly because, for example, I say anti-discrimination laws bring more resentment and suspicion and, these frivolous, I call them frivolous, but all these lawsuits, many of them frivolous, maybe some of them are legitimate, but I feel like there's a legislation of forcing people to love you. And when you try to force people to love you, and for example, like force businesses to serve the different, regardless of race or gender or all these different identities that they've come up with, it leads to more suspicion and accusation and taking advantage of by people who are either sincerely misguided or just evil and malicious. I don't know if there's a difference, but because so often good intentioned people, for example, the people who are fighting over, just to get off on a sidetrack on intentions, people who are fighting over the education of the kids in schools. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they both think that they're fighting for the kids. They're fighting to protect trans kids, or they're fighting to protect the kids from the trans agenda. They're both supposedly well-meaning, but in different ways, I think they're both wrong.
Interesting. And you know what? That sentence alone, I would agree with. I don't know if your reasoning behind it is necessarily what I would agree with, but I think I would agree with that sentence alone.
About good intentions going awry.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you know what? I was in a lecture one time. We were talking about this, right? We try to analyze the bad guy, right? The negative detractor, whatever solution situation it is, and what we miss is we don't think like them. So to fix that problem, you miss the mark, and sometimes, like you said, you misdiagnose, right? A lot of times, because we go to the simplest answer most of the time, rather than to really dig and get through that surface layer. Um, is we will throw something out there and it'll hit and it won't go the way that they thought, and then we have to play this. Okay, now we have to double back, and now we've used resource, money, time, and really we're no further ahead. The thought was there. The thought that we have a problem that we have to fix. Absolutely, I think everyone would agree to that point. But how you get there and if it is practical or feasible is a whole other ball of wax.
Yeah, it's wild. People and people aren't really looking at themselves too. The people who are activists who are fighting against, for example, like anti-racism, they're angry and they feel justified in judging the racists. The only I've seen on a website, the only thing we hate is hate, and if you're hating hate, you're hating, and so it's a misguided thing. It's a misguided.
It's funny you mentioned that. Somebody was just talking the same, essentially along the lines, right? It says, "So you're all inclusive, correct?" They're like, "Yes." So you include the negative ideas as well, right? Like, no, well, you're not all inclusive now, are you?
Yeah.
And then it kind of hit them like, oh wait, I said, no, it doesn't fit your agenda, and that's fine. If you acknowledge that, I will go for it. We're almost all inclusive,
Right.
and I can take that thought and I can run with it, but to pass it off and kind of virtue signal that, oh no, we're here for everyone. You're not, because that means in order to appreciate the good, you have to have the bad.
Right.
Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you have to acknowledge it and allow it to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
Let me ask you, Tony, real quick. Do you agree that racism is real? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So, and you know that Hake doesn't agree with that, right?
Yeah. Like I said, there's everyone experiences their own, right? So, Hake maybe he hasn't experienced it. I mean, obviously we come from different backgrounds, and it was more so that you're talking systemic racism, right?
Either way, but yeah.
Okay, so that's now, as we talked previously, systemic. I kind of bend a little bit on because it's how are we defining it, first of all, right? I think that's where I have a lot of issues. Is I've heard the sliding scale of what's systemic, and that's why I came back to, hey, is it, if you can show me it's in the institution as policy, like there used to be like Jim Crow laws and things of that nature, that I can say is boom, systemic. I can quantify it, it's tangible. But if you're just saying like, oh man, this a group of these guys got together, well, that's not, they're part of the system. You're correct, but does that make them the system? No. So that's where I start to kind of break off.
Let me just ask you real quick, Tony, so I can get it on the record. What is your definition of racism?
Anybody who is trying to prevent someone from doing something, basically discrimination against another person solely based on their race, right? You treat them as a lower class citizen, and you are trying to prevent them from enjoying the same freedoms that the superior class would be.
Okay. Hake, how do you feel about that? Well, I don't want to say feel, right? Womanly minded.
I wasn't calling that womanly minded. He was calling.
I'm calling it womanly minded. There you go. So how do you respond to that definition? Not
yeah,
the words there.
I accept that definition. I say that Jim Crow, if you want to call that racist, but it's kind of like a meaningless statement at that point, because was it justified? Was it wrong? How was it wrong? Because a country and a people, in a sense, they have they have a right to define like how they want life to be and how they want to interact with the different people around. And the blacks didn't have a say during Jim Crow, let's say, as to the policies of Jim Crow, but they were trying to deal with the problem of diversity. I'm using it in quotes, but it's an issue because there's a natural suspicion and a natural clash that happens between people who are so different. Like when I said that families and whites themselves don't get along with each other, and then you add the different, like the slightly distinct culture that Black Americans have and the outward appearance, Satan is just going to feed, if you will, or your suspicion, your imagination will feed into all kinds of extra problems or suspicions and confusion. And, most traditional people don't like the race mixing thing, right? Most fathers want their daughters and sons to marry the same race. Some people have overcome that, if you will, and I use that in quotes because I don't necessarily think it's a positive thing, but
You don't.
I don't necessarily think it's a positive thing. I'm not saying that it's, I don't know, but I'm just saying traditional people want their people to want their kids to be to stay with their own kind, if you will, traditionally. And so it's an understandable policy, whatever some of the policies that they had were understandable. I don't know that much about what Jim Crow laws were.
Oh, so yeah, let me piggyback off that where you're going. So the crux of that, right, in the Jim Crow it was purely based on race, right? It wasn't any other definable, like,
right,
tangible category that we categorize in, right? Like sex,
yes, correct,
age, right? Any of those. Hell, I give you height or weight. If you wanted to put those in the criteria, like, hey, I don't want my daughter marrying a fat guy.
yeah,
That's fine. But you picked the one that was a real hard line. There is no manipulation of it, right? And not to dance this dance and come off offensive. It's not trying to be offensive, but just as an example, I can't say I'm a woman, right? Like,
right,
if we're going to play the traditional sense of this, right? And
yeah.
I can't side straddle the fence. So with race, it's a very clear cut. So like, Texas was actually one of the weirder ones that had some.
Wait. What's clear cut?
No, what I'm saying,
Jim Crow
color,
was distinctly based on
race,
yeah,
race.
Sorry.
So okay, here, in Florida, right? They had a cohabitation law, right? It was like, hey, no Negro woman or Negro man can be with a white woman. Point blank, period. That was it. Like, you can't live in the same space. We don't care. We don't care if they are the help. He can't be in the same house, right? So that there was no real. It was to prevent the interracial commingling, right? But it also prevented a lot of basic life. There you can't.
nurses,
Hey, you can't be in the same building.
Assistants, and
yeah. So that's where, if you really go into each of the laws, right? That's a lesson in itself. Is some of them are, as you said, like, hey, we're just trying to kind of keep the hedges clean, right? And which that happens in every community, whether it be published or just kind of spoken amongst that group.
right.
Every group does that. Like, that's just how we are, right? When you identify somebody, like, like a police bolo, right? You know how they call out somebody? It's the four identifiable categories on how you're going to describe somebody, right? Sex, race, age, and build, right? It's because that's how we categorize everything through our eyes, right? So, and I think that's the majority of where our problems come from. And this is why I say I kind of try to sit kind of to the middle and see, like, no, I think we just go for the simplest thing, is what we see. And, there's a white cop on top of a black guy. It's clearly racism. Probably not. Now, if he started yelling expletives and, hit them unnecessarily when the guy's already down, then we start kind of like that scale will move quickly to say, like, hey, what was the excessiveness for? What was going on here? But then again, does that mean that the police force endorses systemic racism? No, it just means that, hey, they got some other issues with their HR policies they probably need to look into, because you got a jerk on your hand. He might be racist, but that doesn't make the whole police system, racist.
I agree that we can't necessarily point to any specific instance and necessarily say that it's racism, but I think that, like, a lot of the data that Hunter showed demonstrated a tendency towards racism, and there were a lot of studies that he discussed that definitely leans the tips the scale towards that.
Well, no. I'm not saying. Let me clarify that. Then there are groups, collectives inside of these organizations, and that's what drives that, right? So LAPD, they had it was a couple months ago, they made the LA Times, we were talking about the sheriffs. They had like a little gang essentially that was internal to them, right? They pretty much created their own cadre inside of the police force, the sheriff department, which was racist, right? But that wasn't the sheriff endorsing it. They collectively banded together. They were very quiet about it, and they had like a WhatsApp group or something like that, and then that's how they all got exposed, right? So, but once it was exposed, what did the sheriff department do? Y'all got to go. Like that was it, right? So
Yeah.
I think when you look at the data just as the data and not delve deeper, I think that like there's some very tricky stats going on right there. Could there be, at the higher levels, someone who has racial tendencies and they're trying to sway the policies? Absolutely. I'm not gonna, people are people, right? We are influenced by our past and in our upbringing. So if somebody was had that going on, that would be a bias that they would carry.
One thing I would say to like the instances of racism right now, we have a whole culture. Well, maybe not the whole culture, but among the certainly among the media and the politicians, and the establishment, social media, if you will, to be anti-racist, to go overboard fighting against any example of racism or example that they project to have been racism, like not to beat on the Derek Chauvin thing, but to take that example and say that's racism and we're going to fight against it. So right now the culture is way overboard fighting against, in some cases, it's outright imaginary racism. Like they're projecting feelings on Derek Chauvin, I think. And that will cause a backlash of people getting resentful of blacks, Black Lives Matter, of the media. It's only feeding a frenzy of more and more anger and resentment and a trading of accusations and division in the country. I think that Black Lives Matter and the supporting of that movement in the media and the politics has been detrimental to the unity of the country, to the mutual understanding of people in general. And I think Obama was contributing a lot to that by, when he said, oh, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon, implying that George Zimmerman did this, shot him in self-defense because he was racist and it was actually a murder. It wasn't self-defense, for example, when he had no proof of anything. He was just saying that to feed that speculation and feed the imagination, which is Satan.
See, that's the thing. When you say stuff like that, what comes to my mind is what you're describing sounds to me like racism.
What do you explain what you mean by what did I describe?
If
that
people,
sounded like racism.
It goes back to what we started talking about at the beginning of the conversation, is that when people are assuming racial animus from white people, that is just another expression of racism. Just like a person assuming a black person is a thief or whatever, that's the same kind of thing. Assuming that a white person is a racist is no different than assuming a black person is a criminal.
I know what you mean, and I have talked that way. I've said, oh, it's racism against whites in years past, but I stray away from settling on that, because that's really not, again, it's not the root issue. Like people are evil, right? And the anti-racist can be evil against the so-called racist, and the racist can be evil against the anti-racist, and they're all evil against each other. And if you call it a judgment, then everybody can be guilty of it. But if you call it racist, right now there's a special stigma where racism is worse than murder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like I said, it's a distracting term.
This is what I didn't get a chance to say before. But my definition of racism is simply racial prejudice. Sounds like your computer farted. We're so mature in this chat. There we go.
You look like you're in daylight and you're in San Diego. I don't understand it.
He's in Cali, right?
Yeah, it's
I guess I look like I'm in daylight too, kind of.
yeah,
in
yeah,
LA.
Yeah, so
it's
my
still going.
definition of racism is simply racial prejudice, which, like you said, judgment. Prejudice is just prejudgment, right? So a racial prejudgment is racism.
Okay.
I think that nobody can deny that people make prejudgments based on race, so nobody can deny that racism exists.
I would say, but if you would, why would somebody have a judgment towards whites, or why would somebody have a judgment towards blacks, or why would somebody want to? Right now, I feel that there is a smear Well, I know that there is a smear campaign against whites, and I say that as a campaign. I think it's like an evil, like a culture. It's not I say it's not a conspiracy. It's like a culture, and I think part of it is, for example, spiritual. Maybe it's all spiritual, but part of it you could say is political, because whites are disproportionately Trump supporters. They're disproportionately Republicans, more conservative, whereas the media the media, for example, which pushes a lot of this stuff, is disproportionately much more liberal than the whites. So even the white media are much more liberal than the whites. So they're more apt to be like, oh, most whites are Republicans. What's wrong with the whites? So I think that it's motivated from something deeper than the race.
So Cass, are you saying in the prejudice that it's actionable prejudice, right? There has to be some action or thought given towards the other person, right? Because I mean,
No.
we all. So you're just saying. I guess I'm trying to quantify it a little better, because when you say like a prejudice, yeah, we're just prejudice. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be just based in race. Those prejudices could be based in just the unknown, right? Like I said earlier.
No, because
There's
like
culture.
if it's like if you're prejudging someone based on their gender, then we call that sexism. And if you prejudge them based on any other feature, then we call that another ism.
Okay, so it's
Any
the
other
shape of
kind.
their nose. If I prejudge them based on that, like that's what I'm saying. Kind of
Noseism. I don't know.
right. It goes. That's what I'm trying to give it. I guess a little bit more of a scale to see like where is it. Where's your scale? Yours is just absolute. Anything where the prejudgment is there, it hits. So and that's what I'm trying to. That was the point of that question was, if it was actionable. Like, hey, they have to actually do something that is getting in the way or hindering or doing something or saying something to offend. Like that's where I think I'm more of the actionable sense, where I have to be able to feel it.
See, that I would call that a racist action. Because like a racist action, racist thought, racist this, that, and the other. You have these an adjective, an adverb, noun, blah blah blah.
And in your definition of like, yeah, racism is in pretty much in every action we do to the unknown person, because the first thing we're going to see is color, maybe sex.
No, I believe that everybody is a racist.
Yeah, like I said, and it's it. And I don't think necessarily racist. If we're going to go down that road, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. You can have a good prejudice, right? So like,
well, bad thing. Ooh,
is there an example of racism that's
an understandable
justified
thing.
Or good?
It's an understandable thing. I understand why people are racist, but I don't think it's a good thing. But
no, I'm saying but you're saying. But you were saying it's like, hey, it's a prejudice based on race. There's positive prejudice, like it's a stereotype, right?
Like when somebody assumes that a person who's Asian is going to be a great mathlete or whatever. That's a quote unquote positive stereotype,
I mean, the numbers don't lie.
But yeah,
no, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that this model just works to explain all the data and doesn't leave anything out.
When you mentioned the stats that he listed, in your mind, did those stats sufficiently explain the plight of Black Americans?
Sufficiently explain.
Are those the causes of Blacks' situation? By situation, I mean like the disproportionate poverty and crime and those things.
I will say not completely, but I think it was on the right track. Because you look at this, right? There was that one video where they were kind of saying like, hey, we're going to run a 100-yard race, right? Everyone who's white takes a step forward. There's this thing, hey, you got held back from, let's say, slavery, right? Or then you got held back by Jim Crow. Then you got kind of kept out of banking because of your race. These things all contribute to a lower socioeconomic status, which is going to take you longer to rebound, right? I mean, it's anybody. If you're thrown in jail for whatever reason, right? Well, let's take out the race part of this. When you come back into society, you're going to have a harder time trying to catch up. It's just how it goes. You've lost time, you've lost the ability to gain resources, and everything that's been missed through those opportunities, right? So regardless if it's race, sex, whatever the category you want to use, any type of interference into the normal progression is going to kind of retard the process.
I have a question, and because there's something that Jesse Lee Peterson says, like he's always said. I go to his church and stuff. He says that Black Americans those who are suffering suffer not because of racism, but the lack of moral character. And I think that moral character is huge, and it's so much bigger. Yes, those things do affect, those whatever things may affect, let's say, their life and their situation, their challenges. But so much more important is how you react to life and your how you are raised, the morality, the sense of morality and responsibility that you have.
Okay, well, think about this. So in those same instances where African Americans, when they were slaves, right, they're disenfranchised, and basically they were essentially cattle, right? For all intended purposes, you were initiated into this mindset that you're property, right? So trying to break that, right, is only going to do so much, especially when it's hundreds of years of this type of conditioning, we'll say. So to say like the moral ineptness right there, you can't just turn it back on, right? It's a learned behavior, and if you're the people who your parents, right? If they never had it, your grandparents never had it, and you get progressively better each generation, it's going to take time. And that's what I'm saying. Like, regardless, it's not just a financial thing. It's even the moral fortitude is something you have to develop. Now, some people are obviously they get into better situations, like myself, right? So like my dad came from a horrible background, and then he did what he did, and he's like, hey, you're going to go to this school. We're going to move here. We're going to do this, right? So not everyone's afforded those same opportunities. And then you kind of, like I said, you collectivize with the people that you assimilate to best. And if they're in the same situation, that becomes the social norm. So you don't really grow out of it.
Yeah, what a mess, huh? Yeah, when the environment that you're in and you don't see any better example, it's tough to imagine. But you mentioned that from slavery, they were property, so they didn't have as much agency. But I don't think of the slaves as having been immoral to the point where I feel that most people in general today are more immoral. Part of it, I think, is we're spoiled, but we're more immoral today with all kinds of different things than perhaps ever in America. I don't know. I feel like we're on major decline morally. But I think that even like Jesse Lee, he grew up in the South on a plantation in the Jim Crow times, and he says that Blacks were responsible. They had their families. Although he himself was born out of wedlock, it was much more rare. So there's they've had a moral decline since perhaps the civil rights movement, or maybe before the civil rights movement, but the civil rights movement, I think, exacerbated it with this feeding of the imagination. So they were more moral back then, and they've gotten worse. Like the families broken down, and yes, all races are getting worse, but they're like they've been leading the way for the past several decades.
So if you look at any other race, right, any other group, who's the next leading candidate who had the same amount of oppression, right? There really isn't one right now. Right now, we say Hispanics are kind of getting treated disproportionately right behind us. But think about it like this, right? So if you never got those proper tools, right, and if I give a kid a chainsaw, what's going to happen, right? It's not going to end pretty because he hasn't built the strength for it. He doesn't have the size. He hasn't grown into it. So those morals that you never developed, and then somebody tells you like, now you're on the deep end, right? Now we have so much access to so many things and so much technology and all these vices, right? So you never had the foundation, and then somebody just chucks something to you. Now you're falling through, and that's like that's part of our problem, right? And I agree with you. We are on the decline, and I think it's because we don't understand what real is. We're so into all of these things and these, it's like a Christmas. Everything is bright and shiny, and you go for it, you chase after it. And when you stop to really look at it, it's all for show, and it has no substance. And then
Right.
people chase these things. I ask people to define success, right? How we define racism, right? And no one's definition, it generally comes back to money, right? We're chasing dollars. We're not chasing, hey, what's going to give me the most fulfillment in life? What's going to make me happy? That's successful to me. But the same thing in that line, right? It's they haven't defined it, and they don't have a solid understanding of what the social normative for morals should be. So then when you get the TV example of what it is, and you see that, we glorify all these violence and all of the materialism in the world, you bypass the very fundamental morality that we need.
Yeah. But they had that morality at one point. Like they had children out of wedlock less than whites, I think. And so something happened that
you know what, I think that was more forced. I said, once again, that was the Christianity was forced onto them, like they come from somewhere else, right? And if it's driven into you, right, that's one of those things that was driven in. But then you get off of that, right, and then there's still these policies in place that kind of keep you disenfranchised, and you look at it, right? So I'll even go back a little less far, right? We'll go back to the late 80s, right? So like the crack epidemic, right? So the prosecution, right? We look at that. The prosecution for cocaine was like, we'll say you get 5 years, but for crack cocaine, well, I mean, it triples just. And then who was the primary users of crack cocaine? African Americans versus whites who use cocaine. So then that, right? So there you go. You tripled the time that they're going to be off, right? And they're into, what was his Denzel Washington character in American Gangster? We don't own any boats. We don't own any planes. So we're being penalized for things that really we have no control over. And then it goes into that same just vicious cycle of, we're playing the blame game, but ultimately we just haven't had the time.
The crack thing, that was kind of understandable though, because the crack epidemic, I believe, was associated with murder rates that were double and triple what we're facing today. Although we're rising, crime is rising again, but it was like out of control murder rates, and so they kind of had to be like, okay, this drug is associated with crazy violent crime, and so we need to crack. And black leaders themselves were begging for tough on crime policies, and maybe they got more than what they bargained for, or who knows what. But it was to me that the crack thing wasn't based on the fact that they were black, but the fact that there was this. I didn't even feel that Hillary Clinton calling the violent criminals super predators, because the crime was so crazy. I mean, they were having 1,200 murders a year rather than 300, or it was way out of proportion. So it was politically palatable for Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and everybody, black and white, to go tough on crime. So I don't think that it was really. I mean, I don't think that it was race based. The crack versus cocaine, regular cocaine powder.
No, so that's where I say it's like it's more socioeconomic based on the history of that's founded in racism, right? So that's only a certain subset of the population that was even messing with that, right? So
yeah,
if we're really going to look at it, right, those instead of the 300, the extra 900 people who died were primarily black. It wasn't like they were going into white neighborhoods and killing them. So this outrage didn't really make sense. It was just a way to say we were doing something, I think, and you got to look carried away.
Let me.
You don't think that the crime bothered them? Like, it's wild. Anyway, go ahead.
I wanted to see. I got some people from the chat who wanted to jump in real quick, and I want to see whether Jim Bob here is not on cam here, so I'm gonna unmute him real quick and let's see what he has to say.
How's it going? How's it going, guys? Also, happy early birthday, Hake.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. I'm almost 41.
Congratulations. One point I just want to make out as far as the general conversation is racism. Does it exist? Which seems to be the baseline still topic. Because the R word, because I mentioned in the chat earlier that when I was mentioning that the R word's an anti-white slur, And that's all it is. I wasn't saying that just for the sake of pointing out, oh, it's offensive, which it is for that reason, but and then it's used as a weapon against white people, but that's the only legitimate meaning towards the word.
This is 0022?
Like it's yeah.
Oh,
That's basically the only reason the word even exists. Like there are, if someone's trying to say like, oh, does some races, certain circumstance ever get discriminated against? That's not the same like question of is racism real? Because my perspective is just that the very definition of the word, that's the whole meaning it exists. That's the only purpose it exists. And people, you also use words associated with their lived experience with words as well, more so than the dictionary definition, especially when it comes into politics as well, which it's not just politics we're talking about, but words like as far as pushing ideologies and politics, like all words mean something completely different than the definition anytime it's used to push an agenda.
And that's a problem, don't we agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
I say that yes, racism is used as to smear whites, but I say that the concept of racism is more harmful to blacks because of their belief in it. It's hurting them as well. It's harming everybody.
I think even merely though, like not even merely like acknowledging it as a legitimate word is, it would be like there's no desire to like technically when I bring up, it would be similar to like saying is N-wordism the same thing without actually saying it, but is because like technically every racial slur throughout all of human history had an initial definition other than before it was a slur. Technically the N-word original definition just meant an ignorant person. The reason it's a racial slur because then people started associating that or stereotyping that meaning with the group of people. So technically, I mean, any racial slur could, like, there's no desire to bring back all the other slurs and treat those like legitimate words to be used just like in practical use.
When I say that it hurts blacks, I mean that it's feeding their imagination and their blame and their victimhood has done a great harm upon them. It's a total disservice to entertain this notion that racism is real and that whites are the primary perpetrators and blacks the primary victims.
Well, I guess I'm saying it's because the meaning is, I get what you're trying to say, what you're trying to communicate. I guess I'm saying though, like it's not that it doesn't, I used saying it would be like other racial slurs. It's not that like an N-word doesn't exist. It's that I don't refer to them as that. And that word doesn't mean anything outside the context of saying only applying it to them. Well, technically it can, like I'm white and I've been called the N-word, but
yeah,
it doesn't like take the connotation for one away from it too.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. But I'll admit though, like nobody's better off from like, from the notion of using that word, and nobody's better off from the ill being of Western kind. You know, everybody's better off if we're all doing good. Well, I mean, if white
ill-gotten gain to be had from this thing being pushed out.
That is true. That is true. That is true. And most people, as far as like regular everyday people, like if white people, if we don't recapture our destiny, if total white erasure happens where there's no white people left, like everything bad that happened to everyone else just happens again. Like if white people disappear completely, slavery's coming back by automatic default if white people aren't here to stop it.
Wait a minute, what?
You may be right.
Well, white people.
Slavery.
Yeah, because Western kind was the first people to put an end to slavery. And in most countries that slavery is illegal, even right now, or most of them are Western countries, and that's just the reality.
How could white people disappear?
Well, all the different institutions trying to erase white people. And I mean, not just, I mean,
what race am I?
Which person just said that when looking at the screen?
Cause.
You know,
The
could put
top
that as
left,
I'm gonna poll in the
which
chat.
one? The top left or the
Yeah.
top right?
Top left.
I don't know what race you are, but race isn't just like cosmetics; it's your ancestry.
So I mean, I'm just asking, what happens to white people? How do they disappear?
You're asking how do they disappear?
Yeah.
Well, we're
I
being
don't
kicked
think it's
out of
happening.
every institution in every country that white people exist,
The
mhm.
question isn't how white people would be wiped out. That's not the question. The question, that's a question.
Yeah,
But
that is
that's
if
an
with
odd.
that, hold on. With
It's
that
inevitable.
question, with that question, you should also ask, where did white people begin? When did that pop in?
Where did any race begin? I don't know. And how you know that?
No.
What are you saying? That white people? You think white people were invented and aren't a specific people?
No. The term white, where did that begin? Do you know?
I don't care where it begins because white
okay,
doesn't have to do with it. It's that we're a race of people because
you
white
don't
just
care.
describes skin color.
Okay, you don't care. Okay.
Well, that part doesn't change anything, is what I'm trying to say.
It changes a lot. If you don't know where that started, then it assumes, or a humble person would assume there's a whole bunch of other things, unknowns, that one might be interested in knowing so they can acquire more knowledge and have a more balanced existence and interaction with people around them. So there's things, and by the way, there's a place called the Internet Archives. You could look at the history books there, not you specifically, but just generally anybody. You could go there and read up from the 1800s, 70s, and colonial America, and read what they said, and when those things were introduced. You could do that. It's all free. If we're really interested, we could do that.
But the problem is the semantics over the word white isn't what we're talking about, because like that's like saying like, well, when did they first start being called blacks? It's like, well, I guess that doesn't really change. They were African regardless of what they were called previous.
You don't want to know more then. You just basically want to continue with that.
Sure, send me a link, but that I don't see what that would change or indicate. You can send me a link for the sake of it, but I don't see how that.
Okay, so gentlemen,
would prove.
Let me just take back over my stream here real quick because I'm losing control over it. Okay, so where are we? Go ahead.
You said you asked Jim Bob, how are whites going to be erased? And then he also asked an interesting question: how did they become to be considered white?
Right.
And I like both of those questions.
Yes.
And so, but I want to hear Jim Bob finish his: how are they being erased, or how are they going to be erased, or whatever.
I think he was saying how they're going to be disenfranchised.
Okay.
Well, no, people can't survive while being completely disenfranchised wherever they go. I mean, it'd be one thing if it was just like one Western country here and there, but it's everywhere we go. We just can't survive that way.
I beg to disagree.
And on top of that, there's also the birth rates too. The difference in between, I mean, just that alone.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I say now something or no?
Go ahead.
I know I jumped in, Jim Bob, but the problem was that I got a little bit too excited there when you said something and I went off. So forgive me for that. Obviously, I jumped in the middle of your thing, and that wasn't right. And I used it as a point to make a point, and that wasn't right because I didn't let you do your thing. So I recognize that. I just want to say this: that the term white, right? If you look at like the United States and the census and what it encompasses, are you guys aware of what the actual term legally? We're not talking now emotionally, culturally, within, although it all plays and coalesces into one thing. I'm talking about what it says legally, what that is. Do we know?
I know sometimes they try to sneak in and try to say that like certain kinds of Spanish is which there's arguments and stuff that if Spaniards from, as far as I've seen stuff, possibly, if I don't want to argue if people from Spain are white or not, but they'll try to include like people who definitely aren't Western heritage, like sometimes like Mexicans and stuff from different institutions and places. I don't know which like particular department are you saying? You're saying the natural what was the census, like a census bureau?
Yeah, the Census Bureau.
Yeah,
That's the thing. I've seen
what
some
is the
trying to say that a range of different people are, some that I know
Yeah,
aren't.
but I've got a whole thing to say.
What is the answer? Let's get the answer. Come on.
Yeah, that's so. It includes, according to the reckoning of the United States government, that it includes the original peoples or people descended from the original peoples of Europe, and it includes all sorts of Italy, Greece, Spain, the Northwestern, just the whole Europe, right? Just Europe. It includes all of it because all these people are from there, whatever. So, and it also includes the people of North Africa, across the board, North Africa, and the Middle East, across the board. That's the United States. As so it's and then the original peoples of Africa, African Americans that can trace their or can just Africa, right?
At one point,
here's the thing. That's the reckoning of the United States. But here's the thing: the term white that many people have quite a lot of passion for, and I get it. Originally, what people would say is, "I'm English." That was their reckoning. Oh, I'm Greek. And so it was a European regional thing. The white comes in when the colonies start operating over here. You have indentured white Europeans and indentured Africans that work alongside each other in the fields. And then what happens is, as time goes on, by the way, they weren't separate and all this thing. Of course, we're talking a handful of people, not the amount of people now. And what happens? They both rebel against these masters, and then things shift where the word white was introduced in order to separate, and then it really got kicked off into what we all kind of sort of understand with slavery and the African experience and so on. But originally, about 2/3 of the European folk that were brought here via the British were indentured people with contracts. You can also find them online. You could go to the Internet Archives. They're all there with names that you could probably trace. So it was a different world. So this white category that's official with the United States today, right, exists. And it also is followed by saying race is anything that you want to be or choose to be or self-identify as in the census thing. So a person can be absolutely of African heritage, and by law of the United States, because we're all law-abiding citizens, right? You can easily say, well, no, you know what? Nope. Now I'm of this race. So all that to the side, it's more of a social, they say construct. It's more of a social construct. You're also trying. Let me just say the last bit. Genetically speaking, you could look at like you can look at skin color and all this and this and that. Genetically speaking, and that's also another, you could go in and look at that. Genetically speaking, the difference between myself and another human being that's from Africa, right, is a series of the same exact letters, genetic letters, in different orders, repeating. And the reason they're different is not because that's another race. It's because they grew up in an area that repeated marriage amongst themselves and have certain order called recombination. And then they have this certain ethnicity, and the features may be the features that they are, but though that human and this human can breed a whole nation of people. You know, so we're all in the human category is what I'm trying to get at here. Now, the concept, this race thing, is used by the left and the right because it's convenient. What we should do is when I meet you, I should meet you and, let's say, judge you according to your behavior, your attitude, your values as an individual. And I can't say if you were from, let's say, China or Pakistan or wherever, I can't say that I know every Pakistani out there or every Colombian out there to judge all Colombians as one thing, let alone African Americans, let alone no one. Now, you can have your understanding, but if it's this sort of race angle, it's kind of jaded because you have a colonial history that you've grown up and believed because of mom and dad. And that's the story. And we fight it because politicians love it. That is the story. That's where I stop.
Thank you, Eloy. All right, Jim Bob, go ahead and respond, and then I'm gonna kick you guys out so we can finish our conversation.
Well, first of all, there's a big difference between race and ethnicity of people. There's like different categories of white, just like there's different categories of Asians. But as far as people's genetics do not change just based on necessarily just from reproducing with someone of the same race from a different area. Like a black person and a white person reproduce. One has recessive genes, the other one has dominant genes. The black person, when they give birth, the black parent, the child's going to inherit more traits from that person than the person with recessive genes. And you're also not passing down as much traits and features from that side. But as far as it's not true. We've seen all across the board that there are patterns and behavioral traits when you take a race of people and if you put Chinese people in a different land, they recreate the Asian biospirit.
Okay.
And we've seen this all across the board.
If I can, cause I'd like to respond to like both of those.
Yeah, you can respond to both of them, but I'm gonna kick
It
them
was
out.
all. Forgive me also for not remembering every bit. It was a bit of a long rant. I'm trying to recollect everything you said.
I don't have
Can I
you muted.
reply to that after that this is done? If I could.
Make it real quick.
Can I reply now?
After Hake, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so to the white erasure thing that Jim Bob was talking about.
Moderate.
I mean, we've seen case after case of them replacing a white man. For example, that guy who's was forced to retire from the Supreme Court, Breyer, with a black woman. Like it's so like it's symbolic, and it's so symbolic to them, and it's so shallow in my opinion. But it is definitely something that they're fighting hard for. So that's like a symbol of this white erasure. And there's many different ways that they're doing this. They're just trying to just smear the whites so badly. And it's kind of like they're trying to get whites riled up and angry and then say, see, angry white man. And then to Eloy's point about white, what is white? I like to play around on my show about, those Irish and Italians, we don't count them as normal whites. And I say, these people are not normal white. I play around with Jewish white people and stuff like that because we are like wasps. You know, America was originally kind of waspy, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. And those whites have like values that are being eroded by people outside, and then their own children, because they're not raising them right, and they're being raised in liberal schools, are also losing the values, natural values of white, Christian, fair-minded people who are generally quite fair with all races. And so I think that Jim Bob's point is, slavery could come back because the woke people, if you will, who are taking power, it seems like, are not fair-minded, kind-hearted, justice-minded people. They have a false imitation of justice.
Okay, so I'll say this, a couple of bits here. So the WASP thing that you're referring to.
Yeah.
So don't consider it, but I'll just say it, and maybe you'll consider it. Historically speaking, there was nothing more racist and aggressive towards even their own people as the British, or forgive me, the English, going, not enslaving their own next of kin across the way, and let alone
the Catholics
people that were
the Irish.
further. Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Let alone people further out. They had this India. The whole thing was let's indenture and let's enslave everywhere.
Nice.
They weren't the only ones.
Right.
But the thing is that they had this peculiar situation where they had this Protestant, religion that was not like the Catholic religion. And the reason it occurred was because the King of England wanted to divorce and re-wed because he was looking for an heir.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things in history, but anyways, the colonial era where the word white began, and surely it happened across, the hemisphere after that, was at that moment. You could look it up. Okay, that's when it began. The notion of European and belittling one group and the other. There's quotes from Benjamin Franklin where he calls the German, the Spanish, the German. Nice. Have you read that quote?
No, go ahead.
He goes across the board in like 1750 something, 1756, roughly thereabouts, before the Revolutionary War, and he goes about calling them all the lesser races. I'm paraphrasing now, and they're all quite black and dark and swarthy, all of them, and we don't want them to ruin what we have began here, because surely this is for us. Meaning the colonies. So there was an attitude that's always been present. I'll just say, and to say that there's no that racism isn't a thing. You actually mentioned it out of your lips. You said various times that racism is a thing by just using the word. The thing that I will say in your defense is slightly in your defense in order to be fair, because I don't like, what I don't like is this notion of you bring up, and I don't know if you do it consciously or whatever, this notion of we're gonna lose our thing. The thing is, it's lost already, and yet it's not, because it lives on in people, God's creation, all of us. Mm-hmm. It lives on in everybody, and you teach what you want to teach to your children. Hopefully, it's not bad things, but that's up to you to do for your children. I totally get that. The thing is, if you're gonna attack the left for attack is quite the aggressive word, but if you're gonna attack the left in order to make a point, and I'm doing that broadly right now myself, you should consider that on the right, the idea is that we are individuals before we are groups. So I can't judge one person because they have a category that you can sort of look and see. Oh, look, it's an African American, and they happen to be. Oh, look, something happened there. They a punch on in the face to someone on TV. That means all African Americans are. You can't do that, because that's one human being in a circumstance with a background that you don't know. You don't know every other person within that broad category. You don't know these people, but you can make large, sort of like painted with broad brush about what they need or what they do. You can't really do that. We're all individuals, and this country is actually where you're responsible for your actions. And these groups, this doesn't bode well for the left either, right? This notion. But both sides have deep criticism, because it's the problem is race, is the concept of race, is race. That's that concept. And then you say, we let you people, and it's because of us, and all these notions screwed up. And until we address that, and it's not going to happen until we address that, where I judge you by you as a human being, until we do that, we're not going to have a solution. And you have the right to ban. And if you want to be KKK, not you, but if you want to be KKK in the mountains of Georgia, or if you want to be the Black Panthers over there, go right ahead. But majority of people aren't going to follow that. Most people want to be normal, let alone, and deal with people as individuals. And this whole thing is a political thing. And the race thing is not a scientific thing. It's all bull crap. And I'm calling people that do that they're on the bull crap train. Bull crap train. Because at the end of the day, we all go to the bathroom the same. If somebody does something bad, go ahead and take them to court. Go ahead and do but you can't judge a whole group of people. And you can't make a solution for a whole group of people. Because what's good for this one dude is not good for the other dude in the same group. How do you deal with that?
I'm not sure I follow if you're addressing what I've said about the attack on whites and why it is.
Care if I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, as far as we all like use the bathroom the same. I mean, like that doesn't. I mean that it's not the similarities that make us the same. It's the difference that make us different. And it is scientifical. It's just not true that it's not. There's no science behind there being different races and even ethnicities within races of people and different differences. Maybe IQ, different traits and stuff.
That's
and also,
true,
hold on.
No,
yes, it is.
That's a lot.
Yes, it is.
Go ahead and check everybody. Go now and figure that out and bring as much proof as you can. Show me where there's races. Genetically speaking, prove it.
That there are races of people. That would be like asking me give the scientific evidence that gender isn't fluid and there's a difference in a man and a woman.
That's
a racial slur too. That was another point. Yeah, that guy before made that argument like, oh, it's because you were raised on colonial and told this was the truth. No, the exact opposite. We're told our whole lives that you're right and I'm incorrect. So no, it wasn't. We weren't raised to actually believe that. That's all flat out lie.
No, dude, that's not how that works, dude.
Okay.
So are you also like the gentleman here within the WASP world? Is that your history?
You know what that means? WASP. What does that mean?
Yeah, white Protestant, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So
no, I'm the exact opposite of all those things. I'm white positive, which means I believe in the well-being of Western kind and the well-being of all races of people and don't hate anybody, even white people. That's the exact opposite of that. It's also the exact opposite of any racial supremacy.
Okay, so I just encourage anybody, and to lay it down and crush me with it in the comments later, or when in the future, 100 years from now, who knows? Maybe 100 years from now, we find out we're from the planet Ictar 17. But for now, if you go and look at the genetics, you could go. There's so much information it would make your head spin.
But people don't live in genetics. They live in reality.
No, dude.
Reality is there's an attack on whites. There's hatred toward whites.
No,
and if you're white enough to be hated, you're going to be hated.
Right? By who? By who?
By all the anti-whites, by all the universities, by all of Hollywood, by every place that has a diversity policy, which is just code word for fear of white people. Okay. What are you talking about? Do we live on the same planet?
Did you
and
just
even by other whites?
Did you?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna mute everybody for a second. Right. Taking this back over. I appreciate all the passion and the incense and whatnot. Eloy, I really want to have you on my channel. At some point. You want to say something really bad? You can make it real quick, man. Real quick. Okay, go ahead.
Although I've said all the things I said, I want to because it's a little bit of a
real quick, man. Come on.
Of a bump. I mentioned that a solution is to, instead of saying my people are going to, and this is not good for any of the sides, but it's to daily judge people according to their actions individually. This whole grouping and this whole thing is the political situation, but we're all humans created by God. My opinion. Thank you for having me. Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. No problem. Send me an email, Eloy.
I just didn't. I mean,
please.
Whites are the only ones who think like that.
In a world of collectivism, individualism, suicide. I mean, and of course, we're all human beings. I'm not denying that we're human, or we're not in a broader category too, but people aren't just one category. Just like there's a difference between man and women, races of people, ages of people, backgrounds of people. Like, it doesn't have to be that simple. It's like, well, as long as we're all humans, you can't categorize even someone slightly. It's like, yeah, yes, we all have many differences. There's like an individual differences and different elements and dimensions on how everybody's different. And I'm not denying that we're not the same species or something, or saying like, that's like a whole different, that would be like a whole different thing if someone made that point.
He brings up a fair point.
Right. Thank you, Jim Bob. I'm gonna kick you out now. Thank you so much. Let's talk.
Thanks, Jim Bob.
It's good being here. Have a good one, guys.
Bye.
You too. You know, if I can make a point, I don't know if you want to comment right now. He makes an interesting point, and I made a comment that what the guy said, the guy who was saying we're all individuals. I made a comment kind of facetiously, that's very Eloy, very white thinking, this judging everybody individually and all that. And I say that partly because in my experience, and if you look at, the voting patterns and everything, like whites tend to be like the most fair-minded people for whatever reason in America. Like at least a slim majority of whites are like Republicans, conservatives, honest and hardworking and all that stuff. And like the majority of every other race and ethnicity and little category is more like Democrats and liberals and blaming the whites for stuff. And you look at every Western or white country, they're the ones having the diversity and the immigration pushed on them or accepted on them. And yes, they explored and expanded and interacted with these races so that I guess they get what they had coming in that sense. But they're kind of like the weak people who are gonna fold a little bit, and because they're weak, they're pushed around more. Weak in the sense that they will bend to the accusation of racism. Other people aren't fazed by that accusation.
Go ahead, Tony. Come on.
So yeah, he was kind of speaking in absolutes, right? And then I don't think there are any absolutes when it comes to this, right? Because it came off more as a popular sentiment than it did as any type of real thing. And whenever I see people get to that extreme where it's us versus them, they generally miss the bigger picture that there are way more commonalities than there are differences. But yes, we do identify the differences.
Were you talking about Jim Bob?
Yeah.
Bob in absolutes? Okay.
Yeah, Jim Bob would own some absolutes, and it's his position, right? It's his opinion. But yeah, whenever I've seen that throughout many governments that I've studied, it generally goes bad for them after that, because when you try to say it's us versus them, you're people of the same country, right? Of the same area. You share the same space, you eat the same food. The things that Eloy was kind of getting to is we're all individuals. And it has to be a blended approach, because you're going to see these differences in each other, but it's how do you bring them together to coalesce and just be one uniform thing, right? We're always going to see those things, and that's human nature, right? So we can't escape it. And it's how do you incorporate that and catch your bias and not have any guilt for anything that happened in the past. If you personally did nothing to me, I'm not going to judge you on the actions of the past, right? I can't judge you on what your great grandfather did to my great grandfather. That's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
But in the same sense, I can recognize that did have a toll in the aggregate later on. But I'm not going to hold you personally accountable for it. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I found it so insane when I read in Wikipedia recently about Ben Affleck, because he's getting back together with some woman he used to be with, and I just happened to read his Wikipedia, and Henry Louis Gates just did his ancestry and discovered that he had a slave owner in his ancestry, and somehow or another people covered it up and it didn't air, and then it was this big controversy because he got special treatment allegedly. And it's like, why would you be ashamed of that? Like it's in a sense it's kind of cool, but there's this false, like you said, a false shame about the past. And in all honesty, I feel that it's a terrible shame that self-righteous, phony politicians and activists are trying to tear down Confederate monuments and slave owners, monuments to these people, because supposedly
you want to stay on this stream all night, don't you?
Yeah.
You don't want to go. You don't want to go to bed
because they feel angry about it or whatever.
So with those monuments, though, a lot of those were brought up later in the 50s and 60s. They're not hundreds of years old, right? So that's yes, I believe you should not erase history, right? That whether it's good or bad. Like you look at how the Germans kind of talk about World War II, right? they're not beating themselves up about it like how because we have so much diversity, right? But they are very clear about this is what happened, right? We're moving on from it. We will never repeat it, but we're not going to sit here and browbeat the shit out of each other every day about it. It doesn't there's no forward movement there. The same thing when you had spoke earlier about the Black Lives Matter, right? So
Yeah.
the ideology, right? The fact that yes, sometimes you need to actually bring some people up who have been kind of held down. That part, 100% of the organization as itself, I have many issues there.
Yeah.
It's just bad with most organizations like that. I think the politics will always erode the underlying message, but that's just one of those things. It hurts my head to see that.
I feel that the message of Black Lives Matter was poisoned from the start because it was a kind of a womanly backhanded accusation against whites that you don't think that we matter and we're telling you we matter. And to me, that's like whites are the last people whom you need to tell that you matter. Like you need to tell the people who are acting erratic with the police, hey, control, get some peace in your life so you don't get yourself in a situation where a cop could potentially make a mistake and kill you or whatever. And hey,
well, hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
But this is it's difficult because let me be honest with you, Hake. I mean, I've moderated you on a few debates, right? And
yeah,
I don't want to like really like say this because I'm gonna probably moderate you again in the future, and I don't want you to have this in your head like always thinking
you're fine
like this. But I'm just gonna tell you like honestly, like I feel like it's difficult to discuss things with you because it's easy for you to jump around from topic to topic.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know?
All right.
I really feel like if we're going to make any kind of progress on any kind of issue, we really got to like stick to something and just like really drill down into it.
All right.
So I would like to know like what part of I mean, for me, I think it is the definition of racism that is the core of this whole thing. I think that once we really get some kind of agreement on that, this whole thing will start to unravel. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know if Tony or you have a different thought of that, but what do you guys think is the core of all of these disagreements that we have?
Nobody wants to admit they might be wrong.
I think there's truth to that. Are you going to elaborate?
Yeah, so I try to start from positions, and this is probably a revelation in the last couple of years. Is when we debate, when we have any type of intellectual dialogue, we always start from that position that we're on the side of right, and we're going to argue it, right? We don't ever take that minute and go like, what if I'm starting from the position of wrong, right? Maybe I missed something. Maybe I don't have all the facts, right? And if we try to meet in that middle ground to say, hey, maybe you have something there of substance that tweaks my argument. It doesn't necessarily negate it, but it adds to it. It amplifies it, and we come together, right? Because you look at this, the left and right is so divided, it's so divisive, and there's a lot of overlap. Like if you said, "Hey, if we went to Congress and say, hey, what are the top 10 things the GOP wants?" and Dems, what do you want? Their agendas are different, so you could trade off and work out and have balance, but we just don't do it because we're so set on being right. And there's only one right way. If there was only one right way, we'd only have one party, right? We'd only have one way of doing things. So that's kind of where I go with it.
That's why I kind of liked that. For example, Trump in principle was willing to work with people, and he worked with people whom he talked like a dog to, and then he would work with them, and I like that. But okay, so what is the root of this racism thing? I think that the root is really good versus evil, and like a lie, like from like Satan, like it goes back like maybe from the Garden of Eden, if you will, like where Satan fed this lie to Eve about equality. You can be equal with God, and so she was misguided and thought, oh, you know what, this fruit seems like it'll be good, and it would be great to know, have knowledge like God. I want to be like God.
Okay, so let me just stop you right there.
Okay,
I'm an atheist.
All right.
I don't believe that it happened at all.
Take it metaphorically then.
So is that like, going to be the issue? That
no, I don't think it will.
Because
okay, so replace Satan with the imagination, if you will. Getting back into this racism thing, because racism is when you call something racist, you're assigning basically a motive or a mindset to a person. If you're calling a person racist, you're saying You're saying this person is judging this person based on race or something like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm not assigning a motive to it.
Okay,
There's no motivation.
you're assigning a mindset, I guess, a judgment on that person.
Yes, but it could be totally involuntary.
Right. Yeah. I say that itself, it comes very often from the imagination, meaning in your imagination, you are imagining this person to have this bias, whether it's conscious or not. And that is like a trick from our human nature, if you will, our messed up human nature, to look at another person and judge this other person and not look at your own judgment.
So I do look at my own judgment quite a bit.
Nice.
Let me just tell you, I'm half black, half white. My mom is black, my dad is white. And growing up, I was raised for the first 10 years of my life in an exclusively white area. It was a suburb. We lived in a farmhouse, and I didn't know there. We went to we were Jehovah's Witnesses, and there was exactly 3 black people there besides my mom and us. Right? I had no idea.
The church?
This it was a kingdom hall, they call it, right?
Okay.
I did not know that my mom was black. I did not know that we were black. And I remember very vividly one day we were downtown in Cleveland, and I saw all these black people around, and I'm like, what's going on? Who are all these people, right? So that's the perspective I'm coming from here, right? I know from observing myself. Now, I'm a person who's genetically exactly half black, half white, right?
You grew up with both parents, so you saw your mom, but you didn't realize that she was.
Oh yeah. Let me finish that story. Yeah, let me finish that story real quick. Okay, so 10 years old, 1995 or whatever. My mom comes around. My parents get divorced. My mom takes me and my brothers and sisters, and we go live with my grandma, my black side of my family, exclusively for the rest of my childhood. And from then on, I live in Cleveland Heights, and all the other areas around there. And I'm only exposed to pretty well. Cleveland Heights is an eclectic area, Shaker Heights and stuff. So, but there's a lot more black people there than Westlake and stuff like that, right? So I get to be around my black family, and I get to live out the rest of my childhood growing up in that area, right, in that environment, and get to be infused in that kind of culture too. I know from observing myself that I have biases and prejudices against all people. All races of people, and I shouldn't, based on my background. And if that's possible for me as somebody who's got a black mom and a white dad, then I know it's possible for the rest of you.
But when you say that, are they unjustified? Are they? I mean, because wouldn't those be judgments? Wouldn't they be just equally considered judgments? And the look-alike of whoever did what to make you judge or make an assumption in that way. Couldn't you just chalk it up to we are judgmental people?
Yeah.
And so at root it is a judgment, and it's not. The solution.
I mean, it's a survival instinct, right? When you're when we were cavemen or animals in the wild, whatever stage in our evolution, if you have to make a snap judgment and you have to decide, is this other animal looking at me going to kill me or not? You just have to make snap judgments, and the ones like that
a risk
err on
assessment.
Erring on the side of caution is an evolutionary advantage, and that's just a fact, right?
Yeah.
So that's where all of our prejudices come from, but evolution selects for survival, not for truth. And that's just something we have to be mindful of.
Yeah. Do you value truth?
I value truth above all else.
Yeah. Why? As an atheist, why?
Why do I value truth above all else?
Yeah. If like evolutionary doesn't necessarily help.
Why do I value truth above all else? I've been conditioned that way.
Yeah,
I would say it was my fundamentalist upbringing.
That's interesting, man. When did you turn more atheist? Was it in the teen years, or was it more like college days, or what?
No,
if you don't mind.
I actually became an atheist like completely when I started, or around the time I finished New Testament history in college. I went to a Baptist university after I got out of the army, but I started becoming an atheist sometime in Iraq.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was Iraq. Was that the Bush years or W. Bush?
Yeah. We went with George Bush's surge.
Okay. Interesting, man. I knew a guy who went to Iraq. He was in the Marines. He said he came back angry. And I don't know exactly what he meant by that, but it's interesting, man. Yeah.
It's a different world. Tony too is a veteran. I don't know about his experiences over there, but
I'm still in. What are you talking about?
You still in? You ain't know.
This is why I'm sitting in this hotel room for tomorrow. I have to go do my weekend.
Oh, it was actually still light out. I guess it was 6:45, huh? When I was looking.
Yeah.
I'm used to starting our debates, Kaz. More like 6 p.m. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, Hunter said, James Quinn said, "Oh, apparently Hunter needs to go to bed early. He gets tired early, and so he needs to start at 4." I'm like, that's fine with me because I get tired. I can definitely relate.
Well, I think we're running it down here about now. Tony, I want to give you a chance to kind of express yourself because you have not talked that much. So
it was good to hear. Like I said, this is a passionate topic. I think everybody who brings it up, no matter which your opinion, viewpoint, or position, they feel the way they feel because obviously it's an important topic, right? How we address it, that's there's what 7-8 billion people now on the planet. Like, there's going to be that many possible solutions, right? And there might be some that are more effective and more efficient, but not necessarily any better, right? And as long as people, as you kind of alluded to, have that hesitancy and want to have self-preservation above others, there will always be that that mechanism that creates the division or the separation, right? We will always have it. It's how do we take ownership of that and recognize it and try to adapt, right? I don't think and I've had a pretty good career. And I've seen both it go good and bad. Some people I would take it. I wouldn't say it's racist, and some people try to skew it as racist for me. I said, no, that looks racist because you're black. I don't necessarily think of that. It's probably they just didn't like my personality more than anything because I can be a smartass. So I, and sometimes maybe it was maybe somebody has said some racist stuff to me. But that didn't make it, that wasn't the system, right? It's the military. You get people from all walks of life, so you have to do that. And I've seen some people who come in and had a complete change because of the exposure, right? It's our lived experiences that are going to make us better. So I don't try to chastise anybody for their beliefs. I want them to just to have that position and say, hey, what if I'm wrong? Let me hear what he's got to say, and put that into my toolbox to say, hey, maybe this is something I was missing. Maybe I don't see that. I don't have your experience. And you get better for hearing people's experiences and interacting and cohabitating with them, right? So I think that's probably going to be the biggest thing is to get over the differences and get to know people one-on-one. I see kind of here, like in LA, right? They have the whole defund the police movement. And I thought that was foolish. It's like, if you have a C- student and you take away his textbooks, where do you think he's going? Like, which direction, right? So that doesn't really make sense. But if you want to have the police more involved in the community and try to work about, hey, maybe these tactics you guys do to enforce are a little bit tricky. Maybe we can try to tweak that a little bit, or maybe we can try to say, hey, we're problem areas and try to actually look at it a little bit more abstract. There might be some solutions that are more viable to help people be less apprehensive around police officers, which therefore gets the community more engaged, right? And then that takes away some of that racial animus that's there. Now, are there going to be bad eggs in the carton? Absolutely. But how do we, you can't apply one to all, right? If that's the case, no matter how we look at this, it's it could be, oh, that white person did this, or this black person did that, or this Asian person did this, and then you taint the whole group. That doesn't work. That's just flawed logic. So we have to kind of look at it more and say, that guy's a problem. We need to get rid of that problem. and still work together. I've seen people, like, to the Hake's point, attack the police. And he's like, the whole thing, the police are murderers, this and this and that. And then you want to go to the table and tell them they need to change. Do you think if you come and slap me in the face at dinner, I'm going to sit there and give you anything? No. You have to try to see it from the other side, meet them halfway, and then see where you guys have the comments to hey, okay, I can't give you this, but I can give you this. I can give you a little in good faith. And we work each day at a little more good faith until we get to some semblance of neutral. And that's where I'm at with it.
Thank you so much. I do have some questions if you guys want to answer them real quick. They're not that
Yeah.
many. From 0022, that's Jim Bob. He says to me, that's a trick question, though. That's like asking, does N-wordism real? Its meaning is white person. If you mean, do white people exist, or should white people be called racist?
So he's responding to your "is racism real?" question, I guess, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think Jim Bob was kind of caught on the white part, saying that white people are racist, not necessarily. It goes, and I think we both I think we all alluded to, like, it can go in either direction, right? For the most part, it's just having that opinion of another race. And if you, I mean, you guys said it's just a bias, a prejudice towards them, where Hake was saying more so like you're kind of really digging on them for it.
It's a funny thing, right? Because on one hand, we say race doesn't exist because it's a social construct, right? So I mean, I should say race isn't real. It does exist, but it's not real. But then on the other hand, racism exists, right? So how does that work, right? That's the talking out both sides of your mouth thing that I think you're talking about.
Not for me. I think that we all know that there are blacks, there are whites, there are Asians, there are ambiguous people, there are mixed.
Okay, wait.
Go ahead.
There are people who have darker skin tone than other people.
Yeah.
But is there some feature of every single one of those people that is absolutely absent from every single one of those other people with a lighter skin tone?
No, but we
know
that people call themselves black and group themselves or whatever, right. and or they are, I use the term like white enough to be hated, like some of these, like Donald Sterling. I think he's Jewish, and so I don't know if he considers himself white, but maybe he does. But he was white enough to be hated for being white and saying that thing to V. Stiviano about don't be dating blacks or whatever he said.
Mm-hmm.
So in reality, I mean, living in the world, we all know there are black people. There are these different people we call different races. But I think that I still think that the racism thing, it's a misdiagnosis of the issue, and and like I said, I think it's a distraction from the root of judgment that we're all guilty of, because they're primarily accusing whites of being racist. The common culture is primarily accusing whites of being racist in order to take away their job or just punish them or whatever, or beat them in a political race or whatever.
I really think that there's some truth to what you're saying, but I don't think there's as much truth as you think that there is. I think that if we just could get very, very precise about the words that we're using here, we could really drill down to something that everybody could agree with, or at least the vast majority.
Yeah, maybe so.
I don't know. But I think that we don't have enough time to do that right now.
Yeah, we'll talk again, man. This has been fun. I appreciate your criticism on my jumping around, because in my mind I'm thinking that I'm talking about the same thing when I jump down the throats of the Patrice colors and all them.
I do the same thing. Everybody does. I just
yeah. I mean, we chase the rabbit, right? Because
I think part of the solution is bringing back the spirit of the freedom of speech, where you don't try to punish people for saying racist things, or whether they're hating whites or hating, like that guy who's that singer? She was kind of old, and she got with that guy who said, he said something negative about whites and said something negative about Jewish people, and he got punished. He's a comedian. friends. His wife was that singer Mariah Carey's husband. I'm blanking on
Nick
it.
Cannon.
Yeah, Nick Cannon.
Oh yeah,
I think that
Nick
he
Cannon.
should not have been punished. And like I feel like we need to bring back this spirit of the freedom of speech where we don't form like a lynch mob to force you to apologize and stuff. We just you can have your beliefs
But that's not the spirit of the First Amendment, right? The freedom of speech is that the government won't infringe.
Right.
Not that individuals will hold you accountable.
But what I say is I would not want Nick Cannon punished for whatever he said.
Okay, so if he had come out and said that he is totally for child stuff,
yeah, then okay,
for
yeah,
that?
you can. You're right. That's a little too far.
So what's the difference?
You're saying as long as it doesn't go against like safety and like true criminality,
Right.
you should be allowed to kind of step out there.
In short,
how do you draw that line?
I wish that people were allowed to express their racial preferences, if you will, or their racial beliefs about different races, and if they believe that they're superior and inferior, they let them say it, because it's better for people to be honest and say what they really think rather than be forced to apologize for something that they don't really feel like apologizing for.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm with you. I think people should be allowed. That's how you have that dialogue, right? That's how you're going to get that clarity. And maybe that's Nick Cannon. I think he went and he did sit down. And maybe it was probably more forced than it was. It became some revelation. But maybe he did get something out of that talk. He's like, "Yo, this is not what's happening. This is our history." Maybe he got something out of it, but it happened a little too fast for my timelines of how to come around and stuff. But I think people should be afforded the right to say, like, I was in Southern Virginia, stationed for a couple of years, and it's on the border of North Carolina. And I was driving down the road one day, and I seen all these Confederate flags in the front yard. I was like, "Hey, if I get a flat tire, I'm just gonna call AAA." I'm okay with knowing your position like that. If you want to display something and it might be slightly offensive, but guess what? That's like a rattlesnake shaking its rattle. I don't go in your yard because I clearly see we might have some animosities if I do, and generally probably if you did, I think they still would be okay to a point. But hey, I got a flat tire. I really didn't want to come on your property. They probably like, okay, hurry up and get going.
I have a Southern flag. I call it a battle flag. I have the Confederate flag right underneath this sticker, but I cover it up for the sake of other people's channels.
Yeah, but like
I don't have any problem. So you don't even necessarily know that they don't like black people just because they're flying that flag. You don't know.
But listen, but the history of it, right? It just creates certain feelings. So I don't know. Like I said, if they have it displayed, I kind of go, it gives me hesitance to see it. Like, but if I'm really in an emergency, I'm gonna like, hey, look, I'm out here. I got a flat tire. I'm not really trying to have any problems. Can you help me? Most likely than not, more people will try to help you just because we're generally good people, right? We have beliefs that might be necessarily not be the greatest beliefs, or might be set in the wrong understanding. But I think humans are humans. We're gonna make mistakes, but we're generally good people towards each other for the most part, as long as you come in an appropriate manner.
Yeah, most people aren't gonna kill you.
Tony, we gotta argue about that later.
Yeah, I don't know if most people are good, but I know what he means. Like most people.
No, I mean, most people will treat you fairly for the most part. Like I said, if you saw somebody with a flat tire, if they came to your porch, you'd be like, okay, I'd probably have my gun with me though.
Right.
But I'm like, okay, you got a flat tire here, like, here's use the phone, call AAA or whatever you need to do, and that's the extent of my help. You're not coming in to have dinner, I can tell you that much. But like, I will afford you so much goodwill.
Yeah. Here, let me just ask these other questions real quick. From Based America First says, if we categorize through our eyes, what about consistently observed behavior?
That would also kind of fall in that, wouldn't it?
Behavior. Do we?
I mean, you're going to observe that behavior mostly visually, right? You're going to look at body language. You're going to hear, but it's going to be also through your audio, right? You're going to hear how they talk, the tone, and their actions themselves. We are creatures who observe patterns, right? That's just how humans work. That's why this whole categorization thing is so big to us, because that's just how we have to do it. We have to be able to quantify stuff or it doesn't make sense. So if somebody has a persistent pattern, right, that's just going to be right there. It's probably secondary to the visual. Is how I see it.
and we see patterns everywhere, even when they're not there. Just look at all
Yeah.
the illusions that you can just look them up, Google them. Like, oh, that thing's moving. It's just a fucking piece of paper.
Exactly.
Your brain's an idiot, you know. But you're talking about consistently observed behavior. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you're talking about a population, a subpopulation of people that you're saying that there's a consistently observed behavior. What is that word consistently doing there? You're saying that there's a behavior that is consistently observed in a subpopulation of people. So what behavior is consistently? What does that mean? Like 90%, 80%, 50%?
Or is it just like that? Or is it just more than the quantifier there, right? So my joking sense in my head said, so this is like getting in an elevator with the same older lady. She grabs her purse every time I get in. Is that the
consistently to me means
Yeah.
damn near 100%?
Yeah, so I think we need a little bit more on that one, but I mean, there will be patterns, and I think maybe the amount of reaction and what the manner is of this repeatable pattern is going to dictate how strong it is and how much we observe of it. Some people might. It's like eating, right? A lot of people eat, in a lot of cultures, right? They make you eat with the right hand, right? I'm left-handed, so they automatically see that when I go to certain countries. They're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, my bad. Let me switch up. So it's just but that for them is so ingrained that it's like me basically dipping my hand in green paint so everybody can see it.
I think I think we need to bring back some understanding or learn some checks on our reaction when people do things that may seem offensive. Like women tend to feel like men are creepy or whatever like that, or they clutch their purse around black men. If you have the understanding that they're trained or they've seen or blacks have disproportionate crime or purse snatching and stuff, you see it on TV a lot, especially nowadays, like with crime rising.
Oh yeah, it's crazy here in LA.
Then you, even though you're one of the good ones, you understand rather than take it personally. You see that the woman just has fear, and women tend to have more fear.
Sure. I mean, but there's a difference between understanding where someone's coming from and then saying, oh, they're right to do that.
Not that they're right, but you don't get angry about it.
Yeah. So, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. You don't have to get angry at somebody for being a racist.
And I've done that.
But go ahead.
And I said I've done it. So I live in Koreatown in LA, right? So clearly I stick out. Like I'm 6'4". I'm pretty much the only African American I think within like maybe a half a mile. So everyone knows who I am. And when I first moved in, it was kind of the hesitance, right? Because I am different by many categories. You can pick. I'm the only one there. And what it comes down to is, like I said, it's engaging people, right? That's gonna be. And once they seen, well, okay, maybe the time they saw me with my guns was a little weird, but once they saw me in my uniform, they're like, oh. Right, that was something that put them at ease, right? Like, oh, he's military, so he's clearly got to be good. Then we got to talking, and then as people talk to you, they're like, "Oh, you're a cool guy. Like, you're not what we had." And then that helps them to bring down that wall just a little bit. Now they might have a bad experience to Kev's point, like later on, and that you got to play this teeter. But if you don't engage that behavior, and it's accountability on both ends, right? You check the bad behavior, but you also have to encourage the good. Like, hey, no, we can all be on the same page. If we're not doing that, like I hate the being very draconian as this punish, but you have to reward too and encourage. If we're not doing that, to hey, like get out there. We all do the same stuff. Like let's find an activity. Let's have I remember, Cass, when we were growing up. Like remember we used to have like cookouts and stuff like that, where the whole community would kind of come together. We don't do stuff like that. Block parties. We don't do that, and that's where I think we miss
neighbors.
Yeah, my mom used to.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I just encourage people to get out there and just try to meet somebody new every day that's different, and just hear their story. But you're gonna hear something so crazy or so different. You're like, man, I never do. It's gonna make you a better person. It's gonna make them a better person for having that exchange.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So let me just. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
Creative Intention says, ask Hake if he feels the N-word is racist. He's used it before on the JLP show live.
I don't think that the N-word is racist. I don't think that racism exists, but there's a time
follow.
and place for it to be used, and most of the time,
what was the context of your use of it?
Well, one time I didn't say it on the show, but I was Jesse Lee Peterson's producer, and like I had something in my hand, and he just took it out of my hand. I'm like, "You N-word."
To
So
Jesse Lee Peterson?
I jokingly called him an N-word for jokingly stealing something from me. And we have bantered on air. You said that's pretty neurotic.
I said you were being ironic.
Yeah. And we've bantered on air about the N-word, and like we've had debates where a woman, there was this viral video years ago of a woman calling a black man the N-word at some dollar store or something like that in the parking lot. And we were saying, I was arguing that it wasn't racist. She was calling him that because he's black. And when you're facing somebody, you go for the most obvious trait to go after them for. If they're fat, you call them a fatso. If they're black, you just call them something to try to upset them. And so I was saying that she's not racist for saying that. She was said it to be offensive.
Wow. Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Let's say, hypothetically speaking, that someday somebody is able to adequately convince you that racism, systemic racism, and all the above are, in fact, extant phenomena. And suddenly you are able to, or maybe able to is not the right word. Suddenly you perceive that some of your actions in the past are, in fact, racist. Do you think that you'll be able to recognize that, to acknowledge it, and internalize that and process it?
It's hard to know, like what if, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure.
If you were to ignore the saying that racism was and is real, if you were to just say, oh, you falsely judged somebody, then I'm open to having been wrong about misjudging people. I've done it before, or acted. I don't know, but yeah, I'm open to being wrong for sure.
Okay, just wanted to ask that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Karen Williams asked, "Do you hate or do you love?"
Ooh. It's a good question. I think it might be only one or the other, depending on what you mean. I don't know. Nice question, Karen Williams.
Okay. Sideshow Nav says, "I'm white. My wife is Puerto Rican. So what does that make my daughter? And does it even matter?" I think not.
She's white Hispanic.
I mean, which college application are we filling out?
It matters in that they frequently, it seems like, and I don't have any studies, but it seems like mixed kids often identify more with the non-white than with the white. And then they also have like some more confusion sometimes, and it just complicates life.
So here, and I think I missed this point earlier, right? So there's culture and then there's race, right? So
right.
If you're assimilating more of the culture into that, you're going to pull that in. So like I think, I mean, I don't really know when you say there's not really a white culture because there's so many subcategories inside. There's German, there's Swedish, or you can take that. I have my family comes from Norway, so we're Norwegian, blah blah blah. And that's the culture we take on, right? That you wouldn't say my white culture, you'd say my Norwegian. So Puerto Rican, right, is very specific. She didn't say or the questions, it wasn't Hispanic culture. It was very specific to a population. So if that's the case, I would say that the child will probably, to Hake's point, it will take more of the Puerto Rican culture and apply that. And depends on, kind of like you, Cass, where you said, I grew up in a certain environment. So however the upbringing is going to dictate where they pull from.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, when I was a kid, I identified Well, obviously, when I was really little, I didn't identify as anything. I didn't know what the hell race was, right? When I became a teenager and I understood more about what race was and the concept of it, I started to identify as black. And then I grew up and I stopped identifying as any race. I started to call myself cappuccino. That's my race. And I still do that today. That's my race. I'm a cappuccino. Because race is a social construct, and that's my social construct. Yeah.
Nice.
So creative.
I didn't have anything for the cappuccino.
Yeah. Creative intention says, Kaz, are you taking questions? Well, that's covered. Well,
Trick
Venti Grande cappuccino. Yeah. It's just I don't think that you can't tell me what my race is, right? Black people, white people trying to claim or disclaim me, fuck all of that. Nobody's going to tell me what my race is, and I'm not going to own or claim either. The identity of a race, it's like some kind of point of pride for some people.
Yeah.
But to me, all peoples have done horrible things, right? I didn't do anything to get this background. I was just born with it.
Yeah.
I didn't earn it. I didn't do anything for it, et cetera, et cetera. It just happens to be what it is. And I'm not attached to it in any kind of deep way. I feel bad about it. I feel bad that my ancestors enslaved my ancestors. I feel bad that my cousins hate my cousins. I feel bad about all this. I'm ashamed to be a human most of the time. I'm ashamed of all my human brethren because it's disappointing that we're in 2022 and we're still fighting about the same bullshit that we were fighting in 1964, in 1776, all the same bullshit. So I'm not proud to be white. I'm not proud to be anything.
Go ahead.
Well, I think evil is always going to be with us, I think, in this life. And I think that blacks tend to have like a strong racial identity. And I don't call it strong in like necessarily a good way. And whites are kind of shamed away from having like that racial identity oftentimes. But I think that part of it is a lack of, I've heard Richard Spencer, who's like into the white thing, say that the race is your extended family. But I think it's a replacement for having a lack of identity, or having a wanting to find an identity. And especially when you don't have like a good family that raise you to be confident and with God, if you will, or confident, if you will. Are you close with your parents still, or are they alive or around?
I still talk to my dad pretty often.
Nice.
But
he's the white one?
Yeah, he is. Me and my mom aren't so close, but it's nothing to do with race. But to your point, what did you just say a second ago?
I said that. Well, I was saying that
you quoted something.
One of my points was, evil will always be with us, or something like that. But I said that I think that blacks have this stronger racial identity, partly because they don't have confidence and they don't have their fathers. They don't have their
about family. What you said about family. No, I was going to say to that point that these cults that are all around us all the time, they always capitalize on our loneliness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They always say, you don't have a family. You don't have somebody to give you an identity. Here's an identity for you. Join this family. Be our quote unquote brother and fuck the rest of the world. And that's the pernicious bullshit right there.
Yeah.
No, from what we had talked about earlier about with Jordan Peterson, right, and the identity politics, that's what I'm saying. You don't have to agree with I don't agree with everybody on everything, right? There's just no way that you can do that, and that was one of the things that took away from him. If you look at it, when we try to put the people into those categories and say we're doing this for that group, that's it, or like it's us versus them. That is it's always been a dangerous position for me to see people do that. And every time I've seen a government try that, France has tried that. Venezuela did it. It's repeated throughout history, right? Because the human attention span is probably maybe 10 years at best. I feel like in the long term, but at an individual level, it's probably like 3 minutes. So
yeah, definitely.
It's pretty short. Like I would when right before when COVID kicked off and Black Lives Matters was going really strong, I was like, that's great. This is only going to last a year, and people thought I was being just an ass. So I was like, no, I'm really trying to be honest with you guys. You guys don't have the conviction. You're angry. I'll give you that. Everyone's locked in the house. You're crazy. You're rancy. But you don't have a plan. And when I said that, I got called all types of names because I was pointing out the fallacies. Like, you can't insult everybody and then tell them to come to the table and work with you. It's just not how things work. And you don't really have a plan other than to say you're wrong. That's not a plan. That's just being a jerk.
Well,
And
it
then a
has
year
lasted
later,
longer than a year, though.
it did. I mean, because there's nothing else to do. But like, it's lost a lot of steam. There's no. I mean, out of all of the money they've raised, I don't know what they've done with it.
Well, we do know what they did.
Well, I mean, besides
You
that
know
mansion,
something.
which is really nice mansion, I will give them that. Like,
I do not support the BlackLivesMatter.org.
But yeah, stuff like that. It's just and I think Eloy was kind of getting to a point, right? That approaching people as individuals is I'm on board with him on that one.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to end it for the night. Do you guys have anything else you want to say?
No, I really appreciate it. It's nice to meet you, Tony, and
Yeah,
I appreciate the extra conversation. It's Kaz?
Yeah, Kaz. That's
okay, cool.
Yeah, thank you, Hake. I really appreciate you coming by, man.
Yeah,
it was great. Well, I hope we have another conversation. I hope
we
really get to talk about these. I think that every time I talk to you, I just want to stick to this topic and just keep talking about this until we get to some kind of mutual understanding. That's
sounds good.
Something like reasonable, you know.
Cool, man.
I really want us to understand each other if that's possible. I think that's my project.
I'm up for that.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much, and thank you to everybody in the chat. Thank you, Sideshow Nav. Thank you to Hannah Anderson. Thank you to Amy for coming by. Thank you to Eloy, and thank you to Jim Bob, and thank you to everybody else. Thanks again to James for hooking me and Hake up for
James Coons.
Yeah, James Coons, Modern Day Debate, the best channel ever. Everybody is probably already subscribed to that. Why else would you be here? All right. Good night, everybody. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable, etc., etc. Good night.
Good night.
All right.